right, guys, thanks for tuning in to Wednesday Night Reviews. I'm your host, Conrad, and I'm sitting down today at the Canada Comics Open Library, so thank you for tuning in.
Hi, I'm Rotem. Friends call me Ro. I'm the president and librarian of the Canada Comics Open Library. I have my master's degree in library and information science. I'm from the prairies. I make zines and I do illustrations, and yeah, that's me.
Thank you for sitting down with us.
Thanks for visiting us and chatting, and yeah, it's great to have you here.
Well, thank you. Rotem, how did this start?
So the actual library project I started working on when I was finishing my master's degree in library and information science. It started in the winter of 2017, the idea for the project. And I started making the website as I was finishing school, and then I was volunteering at the Toronto Zine Library at the time, and I just started talking about the idea for a space like this with other librarians and other zine makers and a few other artists as well that I knew at the time. And then we officially incorporated the organization in April of 2018.
Okay.
And then we launched in November, on November 24th. We had a big launch event at the 519, and we had a giant pop-up library with our full collection at the time, and workshops by local cartoonists, and a panel on storytelling. And so I guess the idea for the project began a long time before that, though. As I mentioned the first time we met, I've always been a huge comics reader. I grew up reading Archie comics and Mad Magazine, and in my late teens and early 20s, comics meant a great deal to me. Like narratives, people talking about their personal experiences with like relationships and like awful rooming houses, and like mental health and disability, and a lot of those comics helped me get through a lot of really difficult times in my life. And I worked in bookstores and libraries, and I was always frustrated with the way I wasn't able to find the comics that I wanted to find, and narratives by women, and frustrations with the way comics were organized in bookstores and libraries as well, as an all-encompassing genre rather than a medium for telling different stories, as we spoke about a little bit. And so the project, the idea for the library grew from there, and so we got together in the springtime of 2018, and we pooled our collections together, and I was cataloging comics from home, just surrounded by piles of comics, and created the database for Canadian cartoonists.
Yes, which is on your site.
Yes.
Which is gorgeous, by the way. How many, I guess cartoonists, comic artists, I'll say artists, I suppose, are actually right now in the database?
So
roughly.
I think it's over. I just did a big update to try and include more Indigenous creators and Toronto cartoonists, but I think we have over 600 now, and it includes letterers, pencilers, inkers, writers, artists, and there's a few indie publishing Canadian companies in there as well.
Beautiful. So it's not just strictly artists, it's almost from like inception, creation, the actual work of creating the comic to publication, the whole industry.
Yeah, it's
beautiful.
Very much we wanted to include all comics creators, so I did a lot of research for it. Used a lot of amazing databases that exist out there already, like Mari Naomi's Queer Cartoonist database and Cartoonists of Color database, and looked at vendor lists for zine fairs, and went to zine fairs, Can Zine, Zine Dream, like Zine Man Terrace, and looked at there's there's a lot of databases out there, basically. So I did a lot of research, and I also just, talked to creators, looked at zines at the Toronto Zine Library, because I really wanted to include people who self-published as well. That was really important to me, because often people don't have, there's some really amazing stores that have zines on consignment in Toronto, like the Beguiling and Page and Panel.
Yes, Beguiling has a rather good selection of it when you walk right in on the right there. Yeah,
they're amazing. So there are spaces that exist that have independent creators' work, but often people are only posting their comics on like Instagram and only selling them at zine fairs. So I really wanted to make sure that there was a space to make those narratives more accessible as well. And I guess I should have mentioned, like, the goals of the project when we started were trying to make comics more accessible to people through the way we organize them in the library space, and through showcasing narratives that are underrepresented in other spaces, like comics made by marginalized creators. They're not as visible in the mainstream industry, and there are really great narratives out there. So that was part of the reason why we started the project.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned quite a lot, which is fantastic. So specifically, though, you mentioned oftentimes you were struggling to find marginalized creators, female creators, women creators, stories about mental health and stuff like that. You've also got a master's in library sciences and literature, correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I've got that right. Now, obviously you've sort of got the maelstrom to create this place together, where you've got the education, you've got the experience, and also the reasoning and the drive. When it comes to how stores are laid out, or how libraries are laid out, like the Toronto Public Library, for instance, what is it in this library that you've started functionally? How is it different? And how are you correcting for those harder to see or harder to find creators?
First, I also want to preface this with none of us are professional catalogers. We're all sort of taking a DIY experimental approach to organizing comics, because the way they've traditionally been organized in libraries is they are organized on the shelf, sort of all together as sort of one subject or genre.
So for instance, like you might have fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, like in chapters, for instance, and then comics.
You might have, like, on the shelf in the comics section, there could be like a sci-fi comic right beside someone's narrative of like getting diagnosed with cancer, something like that. So you can't really differentiate the wide scope of narratives that there are in comics in spaces like that. You'd have to search the catalog before going into the physical space. Whereas we wanted to show the wide range of subjects and narratives in comics, and that they're really a medium for telling any sort of story, and they could be created in a variety of mediums, like lino cuts or watercolor or different printmaking, ink and pen. So we really wanted to show the scope of narratives out there. So I can tell you a bit about the subject breakdown that we chose for the collection. We have everyday fiction, which are narratives that are sort of everyday stories in the time of or slice of life. We have historical fiction, which can kind of cross over with everyday fiction. So whoever's cataloging really has to kind of take a look at the narrative and figure out what would be the best space to put it so that someone could find the narratives that they're looking for. So historical fiction are narratives that are oftentimes the event is like a character in the story. There's a lot of research involved with historical fiction.
So, forgive me, might that be like the comic Mouse?
So we actually have that in autobiography, because it's like more autobiographical than historical fiction. Because it's based on a real story. But they often historical fiction, so they're fictional narratives, but the events are real. The characters might be fictional. And then we have biography as well. We have anthology. We have autobiography, which is kind of the genre that I'm really drawn to. Really truthful narratives that are very honest, and a lot of people, I feel, it would
Read
be
more?
great if the world would read more of
Okay.
people's personal experiences. And then we have speculative fiction, which is superhero, fantasy, and science fiction.
Okay.
And as I mentioned before, we're kind of taking a DIY approach to this, and based on community feedback and volunteer feedback, we might change those categories over time as well. So none of us are professional catalogers, but we just really want to create a taxonomy that'll make those narratives more accessible.
For
and
sure.
Kind of serve as a case study for how comics could potentially be cataloged different in mainstream classification systems like Library of Congress and Dewey Decimal, because they're often outdated and don't really reflect the scope of comics as they are right
For
now.
sure.
And then in terms of accessibility, another thing we do is we have our stickering system as well. I can kind of explain that.
Yeah, please do, please do. So, for anyone watching right now, it might not be perfectly focused. We'll get a shot of them. Each of the books you can kind of see has an orange sticker or a green sticker, a rainbow sticker, and
Blue sticker.
a blue sticker. So yeah, what are the stickers?
So the stickers are an effort that we are trying to make narratives by marginalized creators more visible, and narratives of everyday experiences like mental health and physical health more visible as well across all subject areas.
Okay.
So the orange stickers are comics that are made by Black, Indigenous, people of color creators or BIPOC creators.
Okay.
The green stickers are narratives that deal with mental health, things like anxiety, depression, bipolar, stuff like that. The blue stickers are narratives that deal with physical health and disability as well.
Okay.
And the rainbow stickers are for LGBTQ plus comics across all categories as well. Yeah, so those are the
perfect.
stickers. And they also correspond to keywords in our online catalog. So another thing we do is we use open source library software. And that was so we would have flexibility to sort of play around with it. And so something that we've done in our online catalog is we've created a keyword taxonomy that will be able to be changed over time as like our understanding of ourselves changes, and the way people kind of self-define their identities, and like self-determination
For
and
sure.
Indigenous communities and stuff like that. So we're taming our keywords. They're a work in progress.
Okay.
But it's good because it reflects the way more people can search, and people don't have to kind of fit within a category that they don't see themselves in to search for narratives that represent themselves or narratives that they want to read. So that was really important to us as well.
Okay, so as an example then, if I wanted to very specifically, and it might not functionally work right now because like you said, you're just trying to tame them and tweak it and make it a little better. And
we're always learning.
Exactly, but ideally, so the ideal way would be I can go onto your catalog and go, through keywords, go, you know what, I want a Indigenous, queer, and actually we'll just end it there. So an Indigenous queer story, and ideally I would be able to see through your catalog whether it's an autobiography, a historical fiction, real fiction. I can see this is a story about Indigenous people, or it's created by an Indigenous person, and it is also quear.
Exactly, and you'll see a list of them, and then you can click on each comic to read more information and know where it is in the space. So that's
awesome.
That's a big goal of ours.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And I should also mention, I just haven't kind of announced it on social media yet, but I just created a bit of a library guide for searching our online catalog, because it is open source software. It's not perfect, so it should help people out a little bit. And then we also presented about the project and our goals and the way our library software works at a few conferences this year. One was the Comics Politics Conference by the Comic Study Society at Ryerson, and then one was the Ontario Library Association Conference, and we published both presentations on our blog. And there's a lot more about historical librarianship on comics and classification, and kind of more details about our cataloging in those blog posts as well. If anyone who's listening wants to check that out.
Please do. Now,